Hi all, welcome to yet another video of a financial accounting. The topic for today's discussion is the introductory part of a hire purchase and installment system. Here we discuss about the concept of hire purchase and the concept of installment system. The two important purchase systems, hire purchase and installment system. Then what are the charges that is there in case of a hire purchase system? So how we can differentiate hire purchase with the installment system? All these things will be discussed in this video. Let us see the concept of purchase. Normally, two types of purchase are there. One type of purchase is those who are purchasing ultimate consumer or customer. They are purchasing for their own usage. And another type of purchase which are brought for the intention of selling. So two types of purchase are there. One is for our own usage and purpose, and another one purchasing certain goods or items for the object of or intention of selling. Let us see. In case of purchase, it is mainly there are some type of situation where non-current asset purchase process, the purchase of non-current asset could not be the part of actually it is the actual purchase process. And another one, purchase include two types of purchase situation. There will be purchase in cash and purchase in on credit process. Purchase in cash, that is cash purchase, and purchase in credit process, that is what cash purchase means. You are purchasing something by immediate payment of cash. That is purchasing something at the time of purchase process itself. They are paying the amount of cash. At the time of purchase time, they are paying the amount of cash. That is the immediate payment of cash situation is there in case of a cash purchase. And in case of credit purchase arises when the payment of purchase of goods is not made at the time of a transaction, and the payment actually you are paying that is you are paying that amount in the future period of time. Okay, normally it will be a future date or a future time or maybe a certain intervals of payment, and all that things will be there in the purchase process. So that is in case of a credit purchase situation. Let us see what is an installment system. So installment system, in installment system, the ownership is transferred to the particular parties at the time of purchasing of the product. That means at the time of purchasing the product, automatically the ownership is also going to transfer. Then the second one is the buyer get the ownership right as soon as the contract is signed with the seller. Normally there will be a contract or agreement that is it is enforceable by the law. There will be a contract will be there, and it is in between two parties, the buyer and the seller. Whenever the contract is signed by with the seller from the part of buyer, the ownership is automatically transferred from the seller to the buyer. So that is another important characteristics. And maybe there will be some type of defaults. That means once you are purchasing something, there will be some default in the payment of installment amount. So this is not normally it is going to happen like this. So you have a certain amount of goods having certain value or amount. So once you are purchasing the amount, there will be an installment payment. There will be a default in the payment of the installment. When the seller can repossess the article only with the help of the court. That means the seller can approach the court with the order or with the notice received from the part of court. Only they can repossess the article from the buyer. So that is the importance of an installment system. And in addition to that, the payment of installment at an agreed rate of interest. Normally the payment of installment will be there, and the payment will be at an agreed rate of interest. That is also an important characteristics of an installment system. So these are some of the important characteristics of installment system, and the first one is ownership is transferred at the time of purchase, and there will be ownership transfer process. At the time of signing the contract itself, it will be transferred to the seller. And if there is some default from the part of seller, the buyer can't take out the goods. He can approach court and getting an order. Only on the basis of the order he can take the goods. And the payment situation, there will be an agreed rate of interest for the payment that they are making the amount to the for the purchase process. These are some of the characteristics of installment, and installment system is a contract on credit basis and is made from beginning. So it is a credit basis contract made from the beginning of a purchase process. And second one is the ownership part. At the time of that will be ownership that is transferred to seller at the time of transaction of sales. Whenever the transaction of sale is made, the time itself the ownership is going to transfer. And the owner or the seller does not have the right to take over the goods even if the consumer or customer fails to pay the installment. That is another important characteristic. You can take the goods only based on the or getting an order, or you can approach the court and based on the order received from the court only he can take the particular goods. And another characteristics is like this: installment system, the buyer can transfer any time to third party after transaction. That is another characteristic. The buyer can transfer goods to any time to third party. Once the buyer is purchased the goods, if you want to transfer the goods to a third party, once purchasing it at any time, he can transfer that goods to a third party. And the vendor can claim the court for a recovery of outstanding amount. If something is happened, if there is a default in payment or something like this happened, the vendor can or the seller can approach to the court and for the recovery of outstanding amount. And when there is something like repairs or something maintenance cost is happened, the seller has or vendor has no responsibility for such type of expenses incurred. It is only the part of the buyer. He has to do that maintenance, pay the maintenance expenses or repairs for the goods that he has purchased for the for a particular situation, because the ownership is transferring. And the accounts are maintained by only one method. So you are preparing the account that is maintained by only one method. You have to follow a particular method and prepare that account. And another one, in case of vendors part, you are thinking that risk factor of the vendor. The installment system, the risk factor is comparatively very high, because once you are giving the goods to that particular person, if he is not making a correct payment, automatically there will be a high risk situation. So the risk factor is very high in case of an installment payment system. So these are the two parties in installment payment system, and purchase of goods is called buyer and selling goods part is called seller. So two parties are there. One is the buyer and another one is seller. And the person who sell the goods is called the seller, and purchasing the goods is called the buyer. So these are the two parties. I will give you an example. For example, Mr. X purchased bike from Honda. Mr. X is the buyer and Honda is the seller. So these are two parties. The buyer, Mr. X is the buyer, and Honda as a company is the seller. So Mr. X is the buyer and Honda is the seller. Let us discuss the next topic, that is hire purchase system. So under hire purchase system, the seller agrees to sell the article on the condition that the buyer has to pay the purchase price through installment. That is the importance of installment system. So at the time of a hire purchase agreement, there will be an agreement between the buyer and seller. The buyer shall pay the purchase price through installment. So he will pay the amount through installment. And the article is not legally sold to the buyer in hire purchase system. There is no legal hire process from the part of seller to the buyer. So legally it is not to the buyer in the time of hire purchase system. So Another one is hire purchase system. If the customer is unable to pay installment, normally what we have already discussed in case of a installment system, the customer is unable to pay the installment. The vendor has no right to take it back, even with the consent of a court. That is the situation. Even in case of hire purchase system, it is just opposite to the installment system. So if the customer is unable to repay the installment, the vendor can take back the goods considering the repaid installment by the purchaser as a rent. So he can take back the goods of a hire purchase system. And if something is happened for in part of repairs or maintenance, the vendor has the responsibility for the repairs and maintenance of that particular goods that he sold to the seller. So that is another characteristics. And another one that is we can follow two methods for accounting of a purchaser. That is asset accrual method or a credit purchase method. These are the two methods of accounting in the books of purchaser. So in this we are following the two important methods for preparing the books of accounts of the purchaser. And another one is that the vendor bears minimum risk on sale of the system. Normally, if you are we discuss about that hire purchase installment system, we know that the risk factor is very high in case of installment system. Here, the compared to installment system, the risk factor is comparatively less. That is the minimum risk factor, because that is what we discussed in the first situation. If he is not able to pay the installment properly to the particular party, he can take back to that particular goods. So there is an option. So the risk factor is comparatively very low. So these are some of the characteristics of a hire purchase system. Hire purchase, there will be an agreement which turns afterwards the sale. The payment of last installment. There is an agreement which turns into sales after paying the last installment. Only after paying the last installment it will be considered as a sale. Up to that time the ownership is with the seller. That is the first characteristics. And another one is the ownership of goods is transferred to the customer only after paying for the commodity. That means only after paying the last installment, the ownership is going to transfer to the particular concerned parties. And another one, there will be the vendor has a right to take back the goods even if the customer is failed to pay for the commodity. If the customer is failed to pay for the commodity, the seller has a right to take back to the particular commodity or goods. That is another characteristics. Then another one, as we discussed in the hire purchase, installment system, we know there is an option. Even if once you are purchasing the particular goods within a short span of time, he have an option for transferring the goods to the third party. That is the situation. But in case of hire purchase system, does not have a transfer the commodity to the third party before paying the last installment. So let us see an example. Mr. X purchased a car from Maruti. So this is Mr. X has purchased a car and he is the hire purchaser, and Maruti is the hire vendor or hire owner, and in between there will be financing parties. So supporting financial assistance on the part of financial institutions are also there in case of a hire purchase system. So this is the characteristics of a hire purchase system. So buyer and seller in case of installment system, here hire purchaser and hire vendor or hire owner in cases of a hire purchase system. So buyer and seller in case of installment system, hire purchaser and hire vendor in case of hire purchase system. So that is the difference between hire purchase and installment system. Let us see. Mr. X planned to buy a car for rupees 5 lakhs. So Mr. X is planning to buy a car for rupees 5 lakh, and with him rupees 1 lakh is with him. So that balance you have to take it a loan from a bank. There is 4 lakh rupees from a bank. So 4 lakh rupees, there will be an interest of 12.5% for 7 years. EMI 7,168 per month. This is the situation. And here Mr. X is purchasing a car for rupees 5 lakh and 1 lakh with him, and balance is taking from a bank, and interest is 12.5%. for 7 years, and the EMI is 7,168. This is the situation. And I will tell you that is after 7 years, the total amount, even if he purchased a loan for 4 lakh rupees, after 7 years, the amount payable by Mr. X is 6,02,154. That is the amount, total amount that he is paying after 7 years. So the total interest payable to bank, that is why the total interest payable by the bank is the difference between total payment and the amount of loan that he has taken from the bank. That is 2,02,154. That is the total interest payable to the concerned bank. So on the basis of which we can have some definition, what is a cash price? So it is the amount for which an article have to be purchased. So it is the actual price of the product. So here it is rupees 5 lakh. So actual price of the product here it is rupees 5 lakh. Then hire purchase price is the sum of a cash price plus interest. So let us see cash price plus interest. 5 lakh is the cash price plus interest is 2,02,154. So 6,02,154 is the cash hire purchase price. And down payment, the amount that is actually paid by the buyer at the time of purchase process, that is rupees 1 lakh. Out of 5 lakh rupees, 1 lakh is paying, balance 4 lakh rupees is taking from the bank. And net cash price is the difference between the cash price and down payment. The difference of cash price and down payment is the net cash price. So these are the different situations of this purchase process. So let us see the difference between hire purchase and installment system. We discussed these 2 points and how it differs from hire purchase, difference from installment system. In hire purchase, the system of buying goods by making regular payment until the full price is paid. So hire purchase, the goods is the ownership of goods is actually with the seller. So only after paying the last that is installment, or you will get the ownership. And this is a credit sales. Installment is in the form of a credit sales, in which the system that is debt is paid regularly in installment. It is paying the debt regularly in the form of a installment. And the second one, it is a process of there will be a nature of a possessing if it possesses the nature of hiring process, and the installment system is a process of a selling process. And ownership of goods remains with the seller until the full price is paid. Until the full price is paid, the ownership of goods remain with the seller. So that is another characteristics of a hire purchase system. So in case of installment system, the ownership is transferred immediately after the payment of a first installment. So once you pay the first installment, automatically the ownership is transferred to the buyer. And in case of hire purchase, goods can be returned to the seller before the final installment. So he can return to the seller before installment. There is an option of hire purchase. And in case of installment system, the goods cannot be returned. He can't return the goods in case of an installment system. This is another difference between hire purchase and installment system. Another one is buyer cannot transfer or sell the goods until the final installment is made. If you want to sell the goods to a third person, only after making the last installment he has an option for selling the goods to a third person. But in case of installment system, the transfer, anytime he can transfer the goods to any third party without the consent of the seller. So that is the option of an installment system. Then the another one is another difference between the hire purchase and installment is that normally there will be a seller, financing party, and buyer. That is hire vendor and hire owner. The two parties are there. In addition to that, there will be a financing party, that is like bank. And the installment system, there will be two parties are there, the seller and the buyer. So this is the difference between hire purchase and installment, and parties involved in hire purchase and installment system. And in case of default in payment of goods, normally there is an option for taking it back by the seller in cases of a hire purchase system, but there is no option for taking in part from the in case of installment system. He can approach the court on the basis of the order received from the court. Only he can take back the particular goods. That is the importance of a installment system. Let us see the repair and maintenance part of the goods that is purchased in case of hire purchase and installment system. In case of hire purchase, the seller is responsible for the repairs and maintenance of the goods that has purchased. But in case of installment system, the buyer is responsible for the repair and maintenance of the goods that he purchased in that particular situation. So this is in case of repairs and maintenance of hire purchase and installment system. So let us see what is the situation of interest rate. In case of hire purchase system, it is a flat rate. So interest is already included in the installment amount in case of installment system. This is in case of installment purchase and hire purchase system. That's all regarding the difference between hire purchase and installment system. And in case of hire purchase system, the main difference is in case of ownership. And if there's a default in payment is there, how can we take it back? So what are the different pricing situations of hire purchase system? So how can we differentiate hire purchase and installment in different situations, like the payment of installment, recovery, all the things we have discussed. So thank you all for watching.